within this conservative evangelical denomination, this has become an issue. It's being taught in schools, it's being taught in corporate America. You have to, in so many corporations, you are subjected to this, critical race theory training and things like that. And it's all over our culture. So I hope that through this, however long it takes, we're able to get a little bit of understanding of what it is, and really this is the important part. Is it compatible with the gospel of Jesus Christ? Okay, is this something that we can eat the meat and spit out the bones, or is it something that's completely and utterly toxic, that if we even get a little bit of it, it's gonna poison us? So that's where we're headed. I don't know how long it's going to take to get here. Okay, so I want to start with this, and I don't normally do this, but I wrote an opening statement. So I'm going to read it, and then we'll go into the rest of it. The issue of ethnic, and I use that word strategically, reconciliation and issues surrounding discrimination, prejudice, and racism is not only a worthy cause, but one which we're called to as Christians. There's no denying the checkered history that we have as a nation, as a human race, when it comes to conflict, discrimination, and even oppression of one ethnic group over another. No one denies it. No one, least of all me, is trying to sweep it under the rug. Therefore, issues of race should be handled with care and sensitivity. However, the solution that our culture is proclaiming, critical race theory, should be handled with utmost clarity and boldness, because it is not a useful tool to help us understand race relations and reconciliations. Reconciliation. It is a false gospel, a false religion that is raised up against the knowledge of God, and we are commanded to take it captive. So there you go. There's
commanded to what?
Sorry?
Commanded to what?
Take it captive.
Take it captive.
Yeah. So I'll show my cards, and that's how I feel about it right off the bat. So I want to start out by just kind of showing you that critical race theory, CRT, is how it is universally abbreviated. So you don't have to say critical race theory 5 million times when you're trying to talk about it. So CRT, I believe, just by looking at it, and this is looking at the material that is presented by, they call themselves crits, critical race theorists, people who subscribe to this theology. This is from their information that I have gathered a lot of this. So it is a religion. All the negative things said about the church in the Middle Ages can be said about CRT. Remember, when people bring accusations against Christianity in the church, they're like, oh, the Inquisition. All the church ever does is take people who disagree with them and, burn them at the stake, or tar and feather them, or, shut them up as heretics, and the church is awful and terrible and corrupt. Well, all of the accusations that people make about, I say the Middle Age church, because that's not how we would be now, can be leveled at CRT. Speaking out against CRT can lead to punishment and cancellation. The cancel culture is rooted in this ideology. And if you're not familiar with the cancel culture, it is, if you as a, who cares, let's say as a celebrity in particular, as a public figure, if you say something that opposes the narrative, then you're canceled. Your show is canceled. You're fired from, you've lost your role as whatever actor because you said something that speaks out against the narrative. So canceled. Little House on the Prairie. We've read almost from the last book in the Little House on the Prairie series with our kids. And Little House on the Prairie is a victim of cancel culture because, and listen, who read those? Who watched the TV show, right? Well, Laura Ingalls Wilder in her books, because of the time in which it was written, talks about Indians and might say some things that are construed as negative towards Native Americans. And so because of that, Laura Ingalls Wilder is canceled. They actually had an award, I think, named after her, and they renamed it a literature award because you can't have that. So if you oppose CRT, you're canceled. You're burned at the stake, right? You're tarred and feathered. Furthermore, just like in the Middle Ages, you didn't question the church. You questioned the church, and you were going to get burned, or you were going to get thrown in prison. Anything of that nature. You cannot question CRT. CRT. If you question it, if you say not even like this is terrible, but I have some questions about this, you're a part of the problem. You become part of the problem, and so you're silenced.
Well, who makes up the CRT?
We're getting there.
Okay.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
I don't know what it is.
It has. I'm going to define it in just a few minutes. It has its own language as a religion, just like we have. We kind of jokingly call it Christianese. There's certain words that we use and phrases that we use that we know because we're part of the Christian church. Atonement, baptism and the Lord's Supper and those kind of things. CRT has its own language as well. Anti-racism, you may hear these. Is it good to be against racism? Well, yeah, okay, that's not what they're talking about. Oppression, is it good to be against, oppression? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But the language means different things. Domination, privilege, and I'm sure you've heard of white privilege. Mm-hmm. Class, and systemic racism. These are some of the words that you will hear in the CRT church, I would say. So not only does it have its own language, it also has expectations of its followers. So here's a sampling. This comes from, and I'm going to quote Robin DiAngelo quite a bit throughout this because she's one of the kind of poster children for critical race theory. She wrote the book White Fragility, and she is a sought after speaker, and she trains. If you want training for your organization, you can call Robin DiAngelo. She will come and train your organization in how to be anti-racist. She is a white woman who is probably extraordinarily privileged, but she wrote this book, White Fragility. She, like I said, she is the go-to person for this type of thing, and her website does a great job of presenting what CRT is in a way that's, I think, understandable. Now I read it and I'm like, you're great, this is nuts. But if you go look at her website, if you want to know what it's all about, go to her website. But here's some of the things that she says under the tab accountability on her website. So this is how you're going to be held accountable to being anti-racist and part of this movement. All right, so this is what Robin DiAngelo says. Tithes and offerings. She doesn't put it like that. This is directly from her website. I just copied and pasted. In order to be accountable to being anti-racist, you should donate a percentage of your income to racial justice organizations led by BIPOC, B-I-P-O-C, which is Black, Indigenous, People of Color. BIPOC. So donate a percentage of your income to racial justice organizations led by BIPOC people. If you earn more than enough to meet your basic economic needs, strive to give until you can, quote, feel it. Y'all have heard this sermon before, haven't you? Your checkbook is a reflection of your anti-racist commitment made tangible through directly addressing the unjust distribution of economic resources based on race. That's a sermon on tithing. She took that point from some poor pastor's sermon on tithing and just replaced the words. So tithes and offerings. Volunteer at the church. Get involved in, this is a quote, get involved in and donate your time and services to BIPOC-led racial justice efforts. Consider yourself a guest in these organizations. Listen and follow their leadership. Do not take over or decide for yourself what is needed because you're white. So you got to volunteer with the church. Next, you got to support other like-minded organizations. When organizing events, make sure they are accessible and scholarships are available for BIPOC people who may need them. Donate proceeds from events to racial justice organizations led by people of color. Promote the work and services of BIPOC people. Channel work to BIPOC people. Seek out and choose BIPOC-owned businesses and service providers. Okay? We're going to support like-minded businesses. Don't we do that in the church? Where do we eat?
Chick-fil-A.
Thank you. Why? Because that's Jesus chicken. We want to support, and genuinely, we want to support as Christians businesses that represent our values and our faith, correct? There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying they're doing the same thing. It's a church, y'all. Accountability partners. I don't know what it is that you've struggled with in your life as a Christian, what sins you have struggled with, or where you needed more spiritual discipline, but we're always encouraging people to have accountability partners, aren't we? In the church, well, have accountability partners who are BIPOC people. An accountability partner is someone you build a trusting relationship with, and so on and so forth. It's a law. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You're also supposed to build personal relationships with white people who have strong anti-racist analysis and who can serve as white accountability partners. These are people you can go to when you need to work through your defensiveness and confusion about racism. That's what we're all confused about racism, even if you don't know it, you're confused about racism. You do not necessarily pay white friends for this. It's the good news, okay? Though there are white people with strong analysis and deep experience who do offer professional paid coaching, do you think you can name one?
Robin DeAngelo.
Yeah, Robin DeAngelo. Attend discipleship at small groups. Attend white affinity groups. Never consider your learning finished. That's part of discipleship, what I would label discipleship. And then finally, break silence on racism. Make sure that anti-racism gets on the table and stays on the table in your workplaces, social circles, places of worship, and other organizations. In other words, spread the good news. Y'all, this is a religion, okay? It's not a tool that we can use to analyze history and what's going on in our world. It's a religion, and it's raising itself up against the gospel of Jesus Christ. And all I did right there was read you what they said. That wasn't my spin. That was just me reading what a well-known crit would say. So now, Ed, what in the world is CRT? Right? Again, smarter people than I have said things. Angela Saylor from the Heritage Foundation, she says it this way: it is an academic concept rooted in Marxist ideology. CRT seeks to make race the prism through which its proponents analyze every aspect of American life. In other words, it's the glasses that you look through to understand the world. It is a world view. Okay? The Encyclopedia Britannica put it like this. This is a little more involved, and this, I think, is a more Heritage Foundation. You know where they stand. I mean, they're certainly on the pro-America, pro-Christian values side of things. Encyclopedia Britannica might be a little more neutral, but they say this: that CRT is an intellectual movement and loosely organized framework of legal analysis. That's the way it started. based on the premise that race is not a natural, biologically grounded feature of physically distinct subgroups of human beings, but a socially constructed, culturally invented category that is used to oppress and exploit people of color. Critical race theorists hold that the law and legal institutions in the United States are inherently racist insofar as they function to create and maintain social, economic, and political inequalities between whites and non-whites, especially African Americans. So it started out as, I'll give you the roots in a little bit, but CRT officially started with a bunch of white lawyers or law professors who were trying to understand things. They borrowed a framework, an ideological framework from critical theory and applied race to it. And basically the idea is that the system, so in this case the legal system, now it's bled out, it's just the system, is meant to protect those who are in power and keep them in power and keep their boot on the neck of people of color. So that's what they would say we need to understand, okay? And if you don't understand that, you need to understand that, and if you don't think you're a part of it, you are a part of it, okay? It's the system. So that's kind of a rough definition. What do I have now? There. A rough definition. When we look at the history in just a minute, it'll make, I think, a little bit more sense to see it kind of traced through. But it is a worldview. And if you're not looking at the world through this worldview today in 2021 America, you're wrong. That's what we're told. And you're part of the problem. So why in the world are we talking about it now? Truth is, and again, I wouldn't deny it, we have a history of racial tension in the U.S., right? There's a whole project called the 1619 Project, which is designed to basically go back to 1619 and rewrite American history, because in 1619 that's when the first African slave came to America. They didn't come voluntarily, but was brought to America. And we can't really understand American history until we rewrite it from that perspective. Okay. Now again, history is written by the victors. Okay. There's probably a lot about our history that we don't know. Has sometimes the experiences and history of people of color been kind of suppressed? Probably so, right? There's something to be learned there. We need to have that perspective. All right. But it is really based in the idea that knowledge is subjective. There's no objective truth. Everything is subjective, and you learn. Knowledge is gained out of community. So we would build our own truth here as a bunch of white people, and how we see the world. If we were a bunch of, I don't even know what the right word is now, people from South America, we would build a different truth based on our experience. Do we get different perspectives? Absolutely. But truth and knowledge is not subjective. That is a very postmodern way of thinking. That it's kind of truth is arrived at in community. There's no objective truth. And what do we say as believers? We say, no, there is objective truth. And it comes to us through God's Word. So we have racial tension. I don't deny that. And I'll show you, I'll kind of tip my hand. My point is not to sit up here and say there's no racism, there's never been any racism, or there was, but it's dead now, there's no racism now. No. It's a real issue, real problem. The solution is not given to us by critical race theory in any way, shape, or form. Okay? That's where my problem lies. Is that here's an issue, a real issue. Well, let's deal with it the right way. And God gives us a right way. Okay, we'll see that. So we have a history of racial tension in the U.S. That's no surprise. It's kind of been aggravated recently over the past 7 or 8 years with some high-profile cases, mostly the killings of black men at the hands of law enforcement officers. So Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, that was the young man who was killed by a vigilante in Florida, I believe. And then, of course, George Floyd, which was just last year, that kicked off all of the rioting and things like that. And so at this point, you have Black Lives Matter come into the mix. They began, I think, in 2013. So do Black Lives matter? Yes, absolutely. Of course they do. Every person, black included, is created in the image of God and has value. And that's the message that we need to be proclaiming as believers. Now, I thought Al Mohler wrote an excellent article, and again, if you'd like the list of these links, it's on there. But his article says we affirm the sentence, Black Lives Matter, but we do not affirm the movement. And he said there are times, it's easy for us to say, well, don't say Black Lives Matter, say all lives matter, which is, again, is technically true. But he made a really great point. He said sometimes the situation calls for us to highlight a certain group of people that are being attacked. And he said, like, if we were, as believers, if we lived in, the 1930s Germany, do all lives matter? Yes, but it would make sense for us especially to say Jewish lives matter, okay? Because they were being especially targeted. So there's nothing wrong with affirming that black lives do indeed matter. We should affirm that, okay? But the organization, Black Lives Matter, because it's an honest to goodness organization. It's not just not just a hashtag. It's not just a thing people say. I mean, you can donate to Black Lives Matter. As an organization, it's not only radically racist itself, but it upholds and promotes and fights for things that are very contradictory to God's word. Okay, and that's just pull up their website. I'd encourage you to go pull up Black Lives Matter website and look where it says about. And it'll tell you what they're about, okay? And it's not this thing called racial reconciliation. It's not equality. These are not the ideological grandkids of Martin Luther King Jr., okay, at all. These are the ideological great-grandkids of Karl Marx, okay? So, again, we affirm the statement, and if injustice is being done to a group of people based on their skin color, then we as believers stand up against that. But not like this. Okay, this is something very different. This is, and again, from their own language, the ideology is that there is a, quote, state-sponsored system of racism in America, and the system is broken. People who are like the majority of the system, in other words, white people, are wicked, and many of them don't even know it. Many of us don't even know it. It's just the oppression and the racism is just baked in to our whiteness. Okay, like I said, I'm using their language. Again, Robin DiAngelo is sort of helpful just because it's all laid out really nicely. And she's kind of a spokesperson. Oh, I'm behind on my slides. Apologies. So here's here's what she says. Racism is the foundation of Western society. We are socialized into racial hierarchy. Okay, this is what she said. This is her, and it's on there like, this is what she's going to teach your organization when she comes to do this training. Hang on, where's my clicker? All of us are shaped by the forces of racism. No one is exempt. This would be an article of faith. Okay? This would be a clear, a non-negotiable point of the faith in the church of CRT. No one is exempt from racism, at least white people. And I don't say that tongue in cheek. I'm telling you, this is the thought process. All white people benefit from the racial hierarchy regardless of intentions. So whether or not I mean to benefit from white privilege, I do. Which is funny because I've walked around some places that don't look real privileged, and it's full of white people. No one chooses to be socialized into racism, so no one is bad. It's just baked in. You don't know it, Glenn, that you're racist. It's not your fault, and so it's not your. So you're not really a bad person. You just happen to be part of this wicked system of oppression. Racism must be continually identified, analyzed, and challenged. No one is ever done. I'll come back to that in a little bit, because there's no winning. There's really no objective. There's no goal. Okay. The question is not if racism is at play, but how is it at play. Okay. So any interaction that a white person has with a person of color, there's always racism involved in that interaction. Even if it's unintentional, even if it's below the surface, even if you love and care for that other person, and as a white person, you can never do anything altruistically for a person of color. All right? There's always something, the ideology, the theory is that you as a white person would never do anything for a person of color unless there was some advantage in it for you.
No, wait, say that again?
Yeah, okay, so I'm a white person. Molly, you are a person of color.
Okay.
If I'm interacting with you in for some way, I would never do anything to help you or that'd be good for you unless there was something in it for me. Okay? Simply because I'm white and you're a person of color. Now it may be subconscious, but remember it's baked in. You don't know that you're racist. You have to be told by Robin DiAngelo that you're racist. The racial hierarchy is invisible and taken for granted. I copied and pasted for most white people. You just don't even know it. You can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't sense it. It's there, it's baked in, it's part of who we are, whether or not you know it. Okay? And this is copied and pasted from the here's what I'm going to train you to know from Robin DiAngelo. I didn't make it up, I didn't redact it, obviously, because that's not the way I would have worded it. This is what they say.
Christian, I'm confused.
Yeah.
One day, recently, I was in Food Lion, and there was a black little boy looking at the gift cards.
Yeah.
And he was going to be 9 years old on the 4th of July, grandma's death. So I just bought him a gift card. Now, how does that fit in?
You did that because you felt there was some benefit for you in that action. You didn't do that just because you thought it'd be a nice thing to do for this kid.
Yes.
You did it because maybe you're trying to make yourself feel better about the racism that is inherent inside of you.
No, I just wanted a birthday present for this little boy.
I know, Molly.
CRT is saying that, not Christian.
Yeah, I know, but that's the mindset, and you what D'Angelo and the whole crowd is saying is you don't realize how racist they basically convince you, they beat you up and convince you you are racist, so even if you weren't, you're gonna be. You know, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So when America elected a black president, they would say, we just did it out of guilt.
White people did. Yeah. And what's fascinating, and there's an article that I give you a link to if you want it, this guy, Carl Truman, who I'll quote later on, he said the thing that frustrated CRT folks was that between the 2016 election and the 2020 election, Donald Trump gained percentage points in African American men, African American women, and Latinos.
Ooh, how do you explain that?
Yeah, it doubled. His percentage doubled with African American women. And they say, so instead of going, gee, maybe our framework isn't right here. Maybe something, or maybe he's not as racist as we've made him out to be. They say these people are so blinded by their oppressors that they're now voting for their oppressors. It's the Stockholm syndrome, where you start identifying with your captors. You say they are so blinded by this system of oppression that now they're voting for their oppressors. I mean, that's where we are in this worldview. When we remove the blame, okay, because remember, no one's bad. When we remove the blame from the individual and place it on the system, we remove the ability to deal with the actual problem, which is the heart. So take something like George Floyd. I haven't looked into the whole shooting match there. I mean, there's a lot. That was a complex situation. Okay, I think it's pretty clear that the police officer he did wrong. Okay, he shouldn't have kept his leg on the guy's throat until he died. So police officers who commit acts of brutality, the bad cops, and there are bad cops, because are cops people? Yeah, okay, just wanted to make sure, like it's not RoboCop. So when police officers do commit acts of brutality, they're not sinners because they're racist. They're racist because they're sinners. Okay? There are racist people in this world. We all know some, okay? Listen, never mind. I'm letting them out. Okay? We all know some racist people. That doesn't make them wicked. It's because they already are wicked that they're racist. It's because the heart of man is exceedingly wicked. And so we can deal with behavior all we want, but if we're not dealing with the heart, there's never going to be any change. All right, so finally, thank you, Rob and D'Angelo. Where in the world did CRT come from? So a little history lesson here. This is where I nerd out. CRT was birthed out of critical theory. There's a shocker. But critical theory, what is that? Critical theory came from the Institute for Social Research, or also known as the Frankfurt School, in the 1930s. This organization was founded by Felix Weil, or Wheel. I don't know how to say his last name. But he was a Marxist. There's a picture of Felix. He was a Jewish, German, Argentinian Marxist. And he gave a bunch of money to the Institute for Social Research, or to start the Institute for Social Research. And they were supposed to figure out, the point of the Frankfurt School was to figure out why society had failed to live up to the ideals of Marxist enlightenment. Because remember, the Marxist utopian ideal is that there's this class struggle, and once the proletariat rises up, the workers of the world, once they rise up and they are able to overcome and have a revolution against the bourgeoisie, however you say it, then there's supposed to be this Marxist utopian paradise where, everybody lives happily ever after. Well, the 1930s, we're a decade and a half, 2 decades into the Marxist revolution in Russia, Soviet Union, and it's not looking much like a utopia. And so Marxists are scratching their head and going, what happened? Why didn't it work? We need to figure out why this didn't work. And it can't be because the ideology is broken. It can't be because Marxism is bankrupt. There has to be another reason. Because we know Marxism is good, so it's not working. Something must be causing the problem. In other words, why is the Soviet Union failing to live up to the revolutionary promises that we were given, by the Bolsheviks? It can't be that the ideology was wrong. Well, this is in Germany, Frankfurt, and as you might be able to imagine, when the Nazis came to town, they shut down this kind of foolishness because the Nazis are not Marxist. They're on the opposite end of the spectrum from Marxist. And so Hitler shuts it down. Well, get this. Guess where the Frankfurt School didn't just disappear. They moved. Guess where they moved?
United States.
They did, specifically Columbia University. It remains in Columbia University to this day. For Marxists, the lens through which you view the world is class warfare or struggle, class struggle, right? Proletariat, bourgeoisie, and it's primarily economic, right? The proletariat are the poor workers versus the capitalist oppressors. Critical theory assumes oppressed versus oppressor, and then they problematize. They make everything a problem, right? That can be seen through the lens of oppressed versus oppressor. So CRT takes it takes the Marxism of critical theory, and instead of economics being the lens, race is the lens. Okay, and the thing that's being redistributed is not wealth, but power. Okay. Carl Trueman says that the Marxist horse, that CRT is a Marxist horse ridden by the jockey of identity politics rather than class warfare. Right? Same horse, same program, they've just inserted something slightly different. Power is what the oppressors have and the oppressed have not. And it's a zero-sum game. Okay? So the powerful cannot simply bring the oppressed up to their level because it's a zero sum. So the powerful have to relinquish their power to balance it out. Okay, does that make sense? So it's not enough for us to say, okay, well, gee whiz, you're right. Like, our nation has largely been represented by white males for the past 240 years. You know what we need? What would be great is if there was, more people of color, more women representing our citizens in Congress. Let's see what we can do. I mean, I'm listening to Robin DiAngelo do a TED talk. It wasn't a TED talk. It was a TED style talk. He went down a TED talk, and she was kind of bemoaning that the women getting the franchise in the 1920s, being able to vote. And I'm looking at that, I'm going, that's one of the greatest things. Like, the people in power, the white men in power looked and said, you know what? We should give them the right to vote too. Is that a positive thing? Well, but it was still, this is how they spin it. It was still those who had power had to give it to those who didn't. Well, yeah.
Did you know that in America, black men could vote years before white women?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Right after the Civil War. Yeah. And it's not, there's never a finish line. It's never, you never look at our history and go, man, we started out this far from the ideal, but boy, we sure have been moving towards the ideal steadily for the past 240 years. Everything that's done to try to, live out life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and all men are created equal. Anything that's done to move towards that goal is, well, that's not, that doesn't count. Powerful cannot simply bring the oppressed up to their level, they must give up their power. James Cone, who was a professor at Union Seminary in Chicago, he died in 2018. My thesis advisor was his research assistant. And James Cone was the author of a book called Black Liberation Theology. He wrote a book called The Cross and the Lynching Tree. He is a, I think, pretty extreme kind of. He would tell you he's more along the lines of Malcolm X than Martin Luther King Jr. And he said it. I mean, he says there's not going to be any progress. Nothing's going to move forward until, and he had a very distinct voice, which I'm not going to try to imitate. It was very charismatic, but nothing's going to change until white people give up their power. Like, that's what has to happen. Not, well, let's share and bring other people in on this. It really, at the end of the day, is like a revenge type of thing. So James Cone expressed that very clearly. Liberation theologies, which there's different streams of, Black liberation theology. Oscar Romero is famous for kind of Latin American liberation theology, which is really interesting. Like, you read his book, I mean, he was a Catholic priest in, I think, Nicaragua or El Salvador, and lived through a lot of really bad stuff. So he's got an interesting perspective that's worth looking at. But liberation theology, it all flows into this with social justice from Walter Rauschenbusch in Hell's Kitchen in New York City. And he was a Baptist pastor, but he wrote about the social gospel, and it all these streams flow into this one pool that now is kind of labeled CRT. So let me tell you, what time is it? Man, it's 7:30. Tell me what to do.
Kristen, this may sound like a really ignorant question, but I really don't know the answer. Is there uneven, is there an imbalance like this in all the other countries, or is it just mainly the United States?
So it's funny you should say that. One of the guys that I like to listen to a lot is Voddie Baucham, and he was a pastor in the United States for many years. He's born in L.A.
Can you spell his name?
Voddie, Voddie, and then Baucham. It's almost like he's from Stanley County. Baucam, I think. Anyway, if you get Voddie in Google, Baucham's going to come up. But he is now a dean at a theological seminary in Zambia. He's an African American. He was a pastor here, big in the SBC. Moved to Zambia for this seminary, and one of the videos that I'll send you a link to is him talking with the Heritage Foundation about this and the book that he just wrote. And he said what people don't understand is that America is like the least racist country in the world. He says, if you don't believe me, he said, just travel somewhere else. and all of the people from Zambia that he's talking to, they're seeing on the news what we're seeing, and they're like, Voddie, what's up? Are the police so corrupt in America that all they do is just kill people indiscriminately? And he's like, what? And he said, the police in Zambia are really corrupt. Like, if you get pulled over, he said, once they figure out what to charge you with, you have to pay them right then and there. Like, you know, there's so much corruption in that police force, and he's like, y'all, people in America do not know what police corruption really is, you know, and so no, and again, what I don't want to come across is that we don't have problems. We do. There are things that there's always places for improvement. That's the beautiful thing about the American project, is that we have been, and I know it's taken 240 years, but we have constantly been moving towards this ideal that our founding fathers set up in the Declaration of Independence. And we're going to keep, hopefully, we're going to keep working in that direction.